So James is going to talk about the great course, The Ottoman Empire, by Kenneth Harl, I think it was?
Yeah, Harl, H-A-R-L. And I'm almost speaking as gruffly as he speaks. That's not me, it's just this
ale juice
potion I'm drinking. I'm trying to get it down in one fell swoop. Okay, do I have a green Joker lipstick on me? That's good.
You may have noticed that some of your Greek salad is gone. I washed off some of it to use to make a pizza for you.
Oh, I thought you were saying I'd left the chair in the wrong way.
No.
And that Buddy had got into the cheese.
No.
Oh, there we go.
I took everything but the tomatoes and cucumber and set it aside in a container for
So
later.
you were adding it to pizza, or you just made a new pizza?
No, I'll make a pizza.
Oh, you got those cauliflower pizza forms.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. That even came with some sauce, didn't it?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Okay. It's that kind of thing that I check out, you know. I'm saying, yeah, you know, how saucy is this pizza? But we're going to talk about the Ottoman Empire. Okay.
Well, you are.
Yeah.
I mean, I could say.
Yeah, say what you got.
The great course. It's 36 lessons, 30 minutes each on 6 DVDs.
That's a lot of.
It's a lot of material
listening.
Because Harl is an amazing instructor. Really, I don't know how he's packed away so much detailed knowledge in his brain. It's incredible. Now I find that it's easy to get lost in the details, though, and
that's the way history is.
Yeah. And then, so for somebody like me, that it's not really what I'm interested in learning.
That's right. You don't care about Bayezid and Mahmud and
not at all. So I get almost zero out of it.
No,
now,
you talk the details, right? Like you listened to the Armenian genocide.
Yes.
And you were interested
I was deeply offended hearing him talk about the Armenian genocide. And I understand everybody has their biases, and he has his, and
I'm afraid he does. So
whatever. But there's no other way to look at that.
Yeah. So you heard some of the details about what happened.
Yeah.
So he was taking the numbers down, and I think the numbers is given. He's saying the German Parliament, whatever it's called, had officially declared it a genocide, and we're given numbers like 1.2 million or something like that. And he's saying no, it was much lower. You know, it was something like 600,000. And he's kind of dismissing it, and I'm going, it doesn't matter if it's 600,000
he was really dismissing it.
He's
like, oh, should we call it a genocide? And it's like, darn tootin'.
Something like that.
That's what it is.
It wasn't as conscious as the genocide of the Jews, but when you're dealing with that many people and you let that many people die in a short period of time, you got to call it something stronger than just an accident or ethnic cleansing gone a little awry or whatever. And understand there was a lot of ethnic cleansing. According to his own figures, he was saying like 1 million people were forced out on top of that. And one thing he did not mention, did you ever get the impression from him talking that the Armenians are the native?
No.
You don't know that, or you?
Well, I knew that, but he didn't. He wasn't mentioned. He was really treading light on the native issue, which, you know, it's. We all remember the song, the They Might Be Giants song, "Istanbul was Constantinople," and it ends up
actually, but it's absolutely was.
But it's why they changed it. We can't say. People just liked it better that way, and but it ends up there's about the name change. Well, it's nobody's business but the Turks, and it's like, really? That's how you're gonna end the song? Because I mean, they're not native there, so
That's not a matter of conjecture. It is a matter of conjecture where the Turks came from originally. But you can make a pretty good educated guess. And they come from northeast of Mongolia, north of Manchuria. When you look at it in linguistics,
So it's always the natives' business. What is done with their ancestral land? What it has been done? What is being done?
exactly.
It's you become you're a part of where you came from, and I really believe that we have genetic memories and stuff like that. I constantly, my whole life, I felt uncomfortable with the fact that I live here. It doesn't make any sense to me that here I am, and this land would have been somebody else's home, but it's certainly, I pay taxes or whatever, but is it really mine? And even the taxes, I mean, essentially, we're just renting it from the government. We die and somebody else rents it from the government or whatever. But I mean, I'm conscious of it. And a lot of people aren't. A lot of people, they feel totally justified, and oh, well, to the victor go the spoils. And
That's right. And all that encourages, it's not really a cycle of violence, it's a pendulum of violence. Oh, you're enjoying the spoils that are my ancestral rights? You watch what I do. So, I do not support the claims of colonizers, colonists, imperialists, anywhere in the world, unless they have something like a democracy that includes the people that have been colonized, imperialized, what have you, and unless they show some sort of a sensitivity towards the rights of the minority. You've heard about that. That's important in a democracy. Just because the majority says something goes doesn't mean that should go. And what I'm talking in this case, or this situation about, is respecting that minority, having some sort of respect for their holy sites, having some sort of respect for their archaeology, having some sort of respect for their language, having some sort of respect for their economic situation, and on it goes. These things are not taken care of by definition in a dictatorship. No, we don't live in a really pure democracy. Some people would say it's barely a democracy. It's more of a democracy. Natives here get treated better than they get treated most other places in the world. There's room for significant improvement, but we don't have a situation here like what happened in my dad's lifetime, 10 years before I was born. I'm an old guy, but not that old. Where the Chechens were carted off by Joseph Stalin. I don't think that was a democracy back in 1944. Anytime under Joseph Stalin. They carted them off in cattle cars in the space of, we'll say, less than a week. All of them, for as many as they could get, lock, stock, and barrel, off to, I can't remember whether it was Siberia or Soviet Central Asia. One is very cold climate, the other is a desert. And they were there, not for a year or two. You know, when World War II ended in 1945, they were still there, where they were sent. And they were there, as I recall, until 89 or 91, basically the fall of communism. So that's the way natives get treated in in dictatorships. That's the way. And so when there's a dictatorship, I don't support their, I don't support the claims of a majority. you know, we've been here a long time, or, you know, like we were born here and stuff like that. They've got to have a democracy. They don't have a democracy. They have no, as far as I'm concerned, they have no claims on the native land. They will not be, and you can see it in a variety, in Turkey you can see it. And this isn't, it's not just in World War I. It's not just right after World War I. It's not just in 1895 and 96. It's when the Ottoman Empire was going, not really full blast, but it was still going. You know, it's ongoing, the way they treated the Armenians, the way they treated the Greek, for all intents and purposes, natives. For all we know, when we look at the Hittite annals, the Hittites came from the Hittites had their empire centered in the middle part of Turkey, not that far away from Ankara, the present-day capital. And the first mention we've got of the Greeks in history is by the Hittites. That's the earliest recorded Indo-European language, and the recording of them messing around in a place called Milawata. Now the way it's read now is, hey, you know, they're coming from the mainland, what we think of the mainland as Greece, and they're messing around there. I'm telling you, there's no proof from what I can tell that the Greeks weren't native to Milawata. That's present-day Miletus, however you pronounce it, Miletus, and it's on the Aegean coast. From what I can tell from linguistic evidence, the Greeks came to Greece via Turkey. And I don't see anywhere where it's proven that the remnant of Greeks were left behind in the western part of Turkey when the Hittites and the Lydians and people that are related to them moved in. From what I can, Greek is a very different language from Albanian to the north of it. It's a very different language from Italian to the west of it. And it's just as good a guess, from what I can see, that it moved in from the east via Turkey. So the Ottomans had a horrible record of dealing with the Greeks. And whether or not they're natives, we've got documents that indicate they were in Constantinople and in places like Miletus. Thales, who's a great thinker, maybe you call him a philosopher, he came from Miletus, this place that I was mentioning. The Hittites called it Milawanda. And he predicted an eclipse, as I recall, in what was called in classical times Lydia, 585 BC. When did the Turks start taking that over? Well, 1000 AD. So the Greeks were in that area of the world roughly 1600 years before the Turks. Well, the Turks have no right to be, as they did roughly in my dad's lifetime, punting, what was he saying, 1.2 million Greeks out of there in exchange for less than 500,000 Turks that were in land that the Greeks had just recently taken back from the Turks. There's a discrepancy in numbers, but there's a discrepancy not just in quantity, but in terms of quality. The Greeks are, compared with the Turks, native to the areas they were getting ethnically cleansed from, whereas the Turks that would be sent back from Turkey in areas that are now Greek today, they were invaders, colonizers, plunderers. I'm not going to mention all the stuff that they did to the Greeks. One of the things they do is they take away kids, 13 to 16 years old, put them in their army, and forcibly converted them to Islam. So the parents are saying, there's a good percentage there. Kids will be killed. They're going to be converted to an enemy religion, and they're going to be coming back and fighting us. Nice. And that happened. And it wasn't a few. It was it's called Devshirme. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it went on and on and on and on. And the people who were doing it had no right being there. I don't believe in ethnic cleansing, but, you know, like what I'm concentrating on is the horrible ethnic cleansing around the time my dad was born. He's still alive, of Greek people from the western part of Turkey. It's absolutely shameful. And this guy pussyfooted all over it, you know. I'm talking about kitty-footed, okay? So don't misinterpret the term. The This guy was constantly saying the Europeans were aggressing against the Ottoman Empire. Well, you know, like how did the Ottoman Empire, you know, he's talking about them aggressing against the Ottomans in Europe. Well, how did the Ottomans get there? Were they invited in? In some cases they were invited in as allies. But you know, like when you're invited in as an ally, you'd better get lost when you're no longer needed as an ally. You know, nicely, you know. You shouldn't have to get an imprint of someone's boot on your buttocks. So, yeah, he's constantly using that. He's talking about Bismarck settling a problem about 1878. What had happened was some of these poor small countries, they're still small countries, like Macedonia, Bulgaria, Romania, they've managed to punt the Turks out of there, the Ottomans out of there, with the help of the Russians and stuff like that. But so Bismarck, the German, as I recall, Chancellor, he helped settle it down. And this guy said he was cynical about it. Well, guess what? Every politician is cynical. Don't single out Bismarck for this. Every politician is cynical. Every diplomat is cynical. Some more cynical than others. I don't think the move, he says, he cynically did it to try and prevent a European-wide conflagration. Now, there are worse cynical moves than that. He knew that it could break out into European-wide war. What started World War I, roughly 25 years later, 30 years later, generation later, was the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, and Bismarck knew it was a powder keg, right? And is it cynical to try and prevent that from happening? I don't think he gained any material advantage in terms of land from the deal. So to single that out as cynical is kind of like cynical, really cynical. So you know, I don't think he ever used the term cynical to describe the moves that the Turks made to move into Europe. You know, there were a lot of cynical moves made by these bozos. They didn't belong in Europe. What were they doing there? You know, like, was it preemptive action before the Europeans? No, but they didn't belong in Turkey in the first place. Was it cynical when they moved in? As far as I'm concerned, darn tooting. Now, I'm not looking to punt the Europeans out of Europe or the Turks out of Constantinople and stuff like that, but they'd better start treating their natives properly. I'm talking about the Kurds. Now understand, the Kurds, where they're located in Turkey, that's Armenian land. You know, what happened was their fellow Sunnis, and they were brought in by, at least the ones that were brought in by the Turks to colonize land that had been vacated by the Armenians, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So it's a very complicated situation, but the Kurds, at least in Iraq and Iran, are native to that area, and they've been treated very poorly by the Arabs in Iraq and things like that. But they, in turn, were used to treat Armenians very poorly. So the Turks have got to smarten up. The Turks have been supporting ISIS, and ISIS has been treating their natives very poorly. There's some Kurds that ended up being kind of like Zoroastrian, but Zoroastrians that have kind of syncretized with Christianity and Islam. And the way it's interpreted on Wiki, if you're checking out the Yazidis on Wiki, it doesn't make much sense. They're just these people that kind of mix these three religions. They would have been Zoroastrians originally, okay, Wiki? Get it straight. And then they semi-apostatized to Christianity, and then semi-apostatized to Islam, right? Why would anyone who is Christian all of a sudden go Zoroastrian all of a sudden, you know? The religion was going out of style, right? Why would they all of a sudden go Muslim all of it? Or if they're Muslim, why would they all of a sudden go Zoroastrian? It's a loser's game if you go that route. So, yeah, Wiki, kind of get it right. Whoever wrote that article for Wiki, these guys are Zoroastrians. They're trying to trying to survive. Anyway, what ISIS has been doing is, I think it's, what's worse than ethnic cleansing? Oh yeah, genociding and enslaving their women, and that's concubinage. You can guess what kind of slavery that is. So, and the Turks have been more than allies in this. You know, my suspicion is when the dust all settles and the blood is all scrubbed up and stuff like that, they'll find out that Turks were actually Turkish special forces were pretending to be Turkoman natives of Iraq, and were in there like dirty shirts, actually controlling the stuff, acting as advisors, just like the Germans were acting as advisors for the Ottoman Empire in World War I. The Ottoman Empire, a couple of years before, are losing to flunky states like Romania and Bulgaria and Greece. And then 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later, I think that's when Gallipoli, all of a sudden, they're just putting the brakes on the Brits, New Zealanders, and Australians. How does that happen? Well, it's because the Germans were in there like dirty shirts. There are about 2,000 advisors there running the show for the Ottomans, and that's what's, I'm afraid, was happening with ISIS between 2011, and it's probably still happening right now. So fake Turks are pretending they're Turkoman, and they're running the show for ISIS. So yeah, Turks are helping out fellow Sunnis in wiping out, in the case of the Yazidis, in the case of native Christians in northern Iraq and stuff like that. They're helping wipe them out. And so shameful. Shame on you. Whoever's running, Erdogan, Recep Erdogan, shame on you. So I don't support any group like Russian claims on territories where they've moved in, like what they've done to the Chechens. These are Muslims, you know. Like I don't care what religion you are. It's who are the natives there. The Chechens have claims there. They've been treated very, very poorly. That, of course, doesn't give them the right to kidnap school children, hold them for ransom, and when the stuff doesn't turn up, you know, killing them. It doesn't justify them blowing up apartment buildings in the middle of Moscow with civilians inside. But the Russians have been horrible. The Chechens, that's not the only group that they've been horrible to. And they gave them maybe, well, less than 10 years of democracy, 1991 to 2000. You know, the rest of the time it's been shameful dictatorship. So what I'm doing is looking at native groups and then how well are they treated? Are they given some level of democracy and some measure of respect? Mm. So this guy, well, he did a good job, gave me a lot of material, but his tone is wrong here. And what is it? You know, I didn't start out and say he has an iron in the fire, and therefore I went through the details of it. Now we can explain why it is. This isn't an ad hominem attack. His wife is Turkish. Okay. And this explains to a certain reason why he's not objective. The other reason is he's an academic. And what he's doing is he's towing the line that the Europeans are bad guys, and they've always been bad guys, even before the Crusades and stuff like that. So, you know, I don't support the Crusades, especially the way they were conducted. But what they were responding to was worse, because the Turks were coming into that area. Byzantine Greece, present-day Turkey, they had no business being there. And the initial motive, moving power, at least for the Europeans moving into that area, or the Western Europeans, the so-called Crusaders, was to stop the Turks. That's why the Byzantines invited them in. Of course, they ended up being why they were called Crusaders. Crusaders means someone who goes, takes up their cross, and they go make a pilgrimage. And in this case, it'd be to Jerusalem. And the Turks were stopping, the Seljuk Turks were giving people trouble getting into Jerusalem, pilgrimage. I don't know. You know, like, you can't do that with people. You know, like, the roots of Christianity, doesn't matter where it ended up. The roots of Christianity are in Jerusalem. And even though Christians aren't native there and stuff like that, they have a certain right of access to that area. If Islam, if Saudi Arabia was taken over by, let's say, the Chinese, you know, if the Chinese block the people going to pilgrimage, even though they were from Indonesia or stuff like that, to Mecca, I'd be pretty exercised about it. I'm not a Muslim, so, well, I probably am Muslim in terms of my extraction, but that's a difference.
Yeah, you seem to have a whole bunch of
stuff mixed in. So South Asian, a lot of the black slaves, actually, some of my ancestors might have been Muslim. They say a surprising number of Muslim. And then I've ancestry from the Caucasus, and I don't know if it's a 50-50 chance that I'm Muslim from that area, but it's a possibility. In other words, I could be Chechen, that's from kind of the Caucasus forelands, or I could be Dagestani, or I could be Abkhazian.
I wonder if there's some way with ancestry that they can narrow it down even more to figure that out for you.
They'll be figuring it out.
Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff I knew before then, like the black ancestry, or American, what is African American, what you're supposed to say. I don't care what someone calls me, just don't say it with a sneer. But you could even use it N-word, I don't care. Just don't say it with a sneer. But, and again, the native ancestry, or indigenous, is that what you're supposed to say nowadays? Again, I don't care what you call me. Don't call me wagon burner. But if it's just something like native or indigenous or Indian, or I don't mean Indian, I don't even care.
Well, it
don't
turns
say
out
with
you
a
have
sneer.
some Indian ancestry
East Indian,
too, but
yeah.
The Indian thing is just weird because it doesn't make sense. But
well, it does, because my dad's side.
No.
Which one?
I don't mean that. I mean calling Native Americans Indians.
Well, it's just because Columbus was going to India, right?
Yeah, I guess, and he was a bit confused, eh?
No, really.
Well, how did that catch on?
Well, it took him a while to figure out that it wasn't India.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I guess you could call it confusion. He just didn't get as far as he wanted to go, right? So, to try to make the best of it, which involved, it wasn't very good. I mean, I think he was trying to turn indigenous people, some of them at least, into slaves and things like that.
All right, well, the camera's going to run out. If
it probably ran out already, just out of patience.
Did you want to talk more about that Ottoman Empire?
Not really.
Okay,
you know, like, it comes recommended, but it also, you know, I recommend reading other stuff and getting a different viewpoint on it. You know, I'm not going to say don't listen to it, because the guy's got the wrong tone, things like that. Understand where he's coming from. You know, like with the academic scene nowadays, you know, like it's the crimes of the father should be visited on the children, and you know, like we're all colonialists and stuff like that. And if we're white, and you know, I don't believe in that kind of garbage. What I do believe in is treating your natives with respect. So we're sitting here squatting on native land. I don't consider myself enough indigenous to really have a claim to the land. And, you know, we've got to recognize it, and we've got to make sure it doesn't get worse, or try not to, and show a little bit of respect. And most places in the world, that just doesn't happen. You know, like in Turkey, for example, you know, he's saying, oh, it was a tolerant society. Oh, my heavens. You know, like, there was one period, for example, where there was the taxation, there was this extra taxation thrown on, 4.9% for Muslims per year, per annum. And for the Greeks, it was something like 100% per annum. Think about that. That's like the joke about Canadian tax forms I used to see in the 80s.